I think it was back around 2008. I basically read some stuff that said, our elections are being rigged. And I thought, well, that's crazy. If that were happening, that would be front page news. We'd all hear about it. I was a bit more naive then. At any rate, I read the paper and I checked their math because that's kind of what I do. I'm a statistician, and it was right. I got my Ph.D. in 2010. At the time, I worked at the National Institute for Aviation Research, and I worked there basically the last 25 years of my career. Before that, I was teaching statistics in the math department at Wichita State University. I always began my classes with the idea that data has a story to tell us, and statisticians, it's our job to figure out what that story is and communicate it to others. That's what statistics is for.
What I'll do is I'll do a quick just 2-second intro because we want to maximize our time, and maybe it'll be our name and our background and a role, just super fast. So hi, I'm Lily. I'm on the board for Election Truth Alliance with Nathan and with Jive. My background is political science and history and policy development, and that's me. And then I'm going to go to Nathan, and I'll call out different people as we go. Nathan.
Yep. My name's Nathan. I've reached out to you a few times actually in the last few days. My background is cybersecurity, data analysis. I'm also a signal officer in the Army National Guard, and some other stuff as well. So I was one of the 3 people that kind of built this organization, and we just wanted to investigate. That was our issue. Is we're like, hey, this looks very strange. Outside looking in, gotten deeper from there.
Hi, I'm David. I'm a data analyst, senior data analyst with a master's in data analytics and about 10 plus years experience just looking at data, and something's up. And that's me.
Hey, I'm Nate Wetter-Taylor. I've got degrees in computer engineering, bioengineering, and a medical doctorate. My work experience is mostly in med device design and manufacturing. Just know enough statistics to be dangerous, that's all.
Yeah, so my background educationally is theoretical evolutionary biology, mostly doing game theoretical analyses using like systems of ordinary differential equations. And I had a moderate amount of statistical education, some graduate work in statistics. Yeah, I think that's all.
My education is sociology, Ph.D. level, didn't finish the dissertation. My profession is technology. I do a lot with algorithms like social and search. I build websites, and then I met all these wonderful, amazing people who are like so much more credentialed than I am. So thank you, and it's lovely meeting you. So,
you're kind of, to a lot of us, our shining light, our beacon, because we've all been doing this for a couple weeks now, and we're like, are we crazy, right? And then someone's already been here.
You're not crazy, and I was not the first, but I did at least a little bit of contribution to it. I've been fairly disappointed at how little the people that are elected representatives don't seem to have any interest at all in even uncovering this. And to my way of thinking, we don't have proof that the elections are being rigged. We have a lot of evidence that only fits that hypothesis. So I'm pretty much convinced at this point myself. But proof is only obtained by looking at the physical evidence, the physical ballots, and verifying that those counts match the counts produced by our machine tabulators. The fact is that nobody gets to see them, and nobody ever verifies the count. That's a big opportunity for people who would like to rig the elections.
We all feel the same way, and here's Jive. So Jive, introduce yourself real quick.
So, well, thank you for coming. So excited to have you talk to us. You can teach us a lot of things, and really looking forward to working and interacting with you. You're amazing. Thank you. I worked in several financial industry companies, and then I moved into the information security world, became CISA certified, CRMP as well, RIM CRMP certified. I guess I was analyzing information, saw some weird stuff, and started posting it on Reddit. I've been pushing down the road of saying, hey, this data is completely bizarre. It's off the scale crazy. We realize, hey, someone needs to be doing this. Someone needs to be looking at the data and analyzing it and making sure it's okay. Every single piece of data points that's outside of us is pointing at the same answer, which is that there's something wrong with this election.
What you've read of my work on election, they all deal with, I basically use what they call a cum-sum analysis, if you are familiar with that.
We've actually recreated your work, an example in Clark County, Nevada, but we'll just jump in here and show you. The reason we were even spooked, if you will, and started hunting for potential answers is we saw drop-off votes not really making sense. Are you familiar with that?
Let me make sure I understand. A drop-off vote is like a vote for president that does not have an accompanying vote for like senator or governor. 5.6% of the votes for Donald Trump did not have a corresponding vote for the Republican Senate candidate.
And exactly. If you look at the detail, it's blue all the way down. So it seems very, very consistently blue down ballot.
Am I mistaken in thinking that that Republicans are more likely to vote straight ticket than Democrats?
The mail-in vote for CBR, we couldn't see a difference between Kamala and the down ballot. The lines literally were on top of each other.
Here's the chart. So as we said, drop-off was weird. We saw that Harris was underperforming when compared to her next down ballot Democratic candidate across multiple states. That's just weird to see. He's got some better graphics, but this is the point: is we're looking at 24. We see a non-human pattern when we look at that performance. She's underperforming. Trump was overperforming, and it doesn't match the more normal.
It looks like in Ohio in 2012. It seems pretty random, but there's definitely blue is the only color that ever goes under. And then 2016, it looks pretty random both ways, 100%. And then 2024 is uniform.
Exactly. Yeah. And we see this in other states as well, in 24, North Carolina.
There's no randomness to this at all. It's completely uniform.
I would say there's a second point in here, which we're overlooking because we're just looking at the randomness. And that's, it looks like a fixed percentage switch from Kamala to Trump.
And so what we were kind of looking at is, as we said, mail-in ballot shows the opposite of what we're seeing. Harris is matching her party, but she's getting a little more than 60% of the mail-in ballot votes. And then, the Republicans are getting a lower amount. When we looked at Nevada specifically, we tried to pull out as much data and graphic based on distribution as we could. Mail-in ballots in Clark County, Nevada had 6 tabulators. And this is just another way of showing that split. When we actually pulled out Trump's distribution, unless we've had any updated graphics for this specifically shows that we're not seeing any weirdness in the mail-in ballots there. We're building this as a foundation to look at early voting. And that's kind of what we did is we said, hey, if they manipulated the election, did they manipulate all 3 types of voting, early, mail-in, and election day, or did they only choose 1 or 2 or et cetera? So we didn't see anything weird with mail-in, and we didn't see anything weird with election day, mostly. I know, David, did you have anything to add, or you just want to kind of?
There is a very clear pattern, like a very clear delineation. The max is 130 or so ballots at a voting machine on election day, because there's 4,000 machines used or so on election day in Clark County. So with that knowledge, we can see, based on the number of votes that each tabulator has. When I say tabulator, it's air quotes because it's actually the voting machines that are happening. But we do see that there's a consistent pattern, very clear delineation.
Population density as of the different precincts. The Republican Party is favored by rural residents more than urban residents.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, because what we're about to see with early voting, when we did this analysis originally, we said election day, we can't clearly see a problem with it, but we've done more analysis, and that's where we're starting to kind of get back and forth on, is there or isn't there influence here? But when we're about to look at early voting, you'll see exactly what we're worried about and what you were worried about.
Okay.
And when you see that, you see clear issues with, as more votes were cast in early voting, more influence was potentially had. And we see that both in 2020 for Clark County, Nevada, we pulled their data, but also in 2024. And what's strange is we've been working on mapping these early voting locations and basing them on the demographic of voters. And these are in the populous areas, which is counterintuitive. Why would the Republicans be exceeding the more votes you have in these highly dense places that are more liberal?
Both of these look skewed to higher number of votes leaning more Republican, but it's much more pronounced in the 2024 election.
So Clark County is kind of unique. We have, we used to, before 2017 or 18, we used to have precincts and specific polling places, but now we have 2 weeks of early voting and have voting in the casinos for the workers. There is no strong red area. I live in the supposed strongest pink area, and my area still is 54% Democrat, 47% Republican. We all live on top of each other here, so there's no definition between areas. We also have a weird turnout in the rural areas. So our average is 60%. Last election was 60%. We don't have one rural county that's at 60%. They're all at 70% and above. We have several that are at 90, 93%. And that's unheard of. This is not a political area, right?
So if you're able to see this at all, can you briefly tell us, so this is the main portion of Clark County, Nevada. This is Las Vegas area, is that right? Yeah. So for all of these locations we're seeing, some of these portions of the area are heavily Republican. Does this match, from your opinion, with the actual demographic there?
Doesn't match with either map. It doesn't match with either map I gave you guys that I looked at for the demographic.
So these aren't super Republican areas like we're seeing. No. The way you read this quickly here is the positive blue is what, presidential votes?
Yeah, it's
Harris,
plus Harris.
Minus Trump is, So the negative red is Republican presidential votes, and the blue is the positive.
So basically the margin between the two candidates at each location.
You're saying that it's like 60% Democrats, registered Democrats in Clark County, is that right?
No, it should be higher than that. Generally, before the pandemic and DMV started enrolling people, Democrats have 100,000 voter advantage going into the election. During the pandemic, the DMV had everyone register as NP. So, and then we have a lot of people registered as this weird independent party thinking they're independent.
Nonpartisan. And the numbers is 571,000 nonpartisans, 546,000 Democrats, and then 403 Republicans are registered in Clark County.
403,000.
That excess of Republican votes for president is not fitting.
It exceeds. So I did the numbers, and tentatively he got for presidential 22% more than the total registered Republicans in that county. So he had to do that organically. You're going to have to pull them from the nonpartisan or the Democrats.
Is that 22% more of the registered Republicans or the Republicans who voted in the election?
It is more than the registered Republicans active in this election. And that's active. I'm not even including the actual amount that were registered last election. That's just this election after they purged all inactive voters. 22% more than his registered base.
Mail-in, she won 61%. She won 61%. He obviously got a lot less. She only got 39.7% in this day that we're looking at now, the early vote. And then for election day, it was more or less even, but she got 47.4% and he got 50%. So this piece of the election was the bit where Nathan was pointing out what the margin was. It's all in this particular part of the election. That's where it had to be gained from.
And, we have the data for Clark County, but we're seeing it everywhere. So, it's easy to sit here and explain every piece of data in every individual area. But if we're seeing the hill pattern across the entire country, then the explanations kind of lose holding.
Some of the other places that you have this, and here's Washoe County as well. This is a different county. This is one of the two most populated counties in Clark County or in Nevada. So we have Clark and we have Washoe.
Go ahead.
I have the early voting for Washoe, and it looks very similar to Clark County. There's smoking gun, if you will, that level where it hits 60% and then pins out.
In the scatter plot, when we put them in numbers, at the 300 vote count, the is exactly the same, and then it starts to change.
And here's that.
What does it show in terms of, or Beth, do you have anything to say about this? Any concerns here from your experience? What is this potentially showing? We mapped this out and
there's certainly something changing. It's not proof, but it fits the hypothesis that if somebody was rigging the election, this is the kind of pattern you would expect to see. That doesn't mean that that's the only way to cause this kind of pattern. You can see that you've got a lot more variability in the lower number of votes tabulated, which is to be expected. But as you get more and more, it's up there and it's really clustering around that 60% line with 60 to 70 or to 80%. You can see that in the center area. So it's definitely not what you would expect to see if everything was up and normal.
Votes per tabulator total on election day for Clark County, Nevada. Yeah, all votes.
Okay, thank you.
That normally distributed, and then you have early voting, very bimodal. And here's for Trump and for Harris, very bimodal. And that was what got me to the scatter plots here that we've all seen. And then after that, I wanted to try to I binned on the horizontal axis here to get some averages. And
so what does this mean? Explain this to us in terms of what is concerning about this.
Okay, this is what's called a cumulative summation analysis. And basically you start with, you order all of your, in this case, it would be your machine tabulators, but you order them from the lowest number of votes cast to the highest number of votes cast. And then you do a cumulative sum, like the first, then the first plus the second, then the first plus the second plus the third, and so on and so forth until you've got all of them. You can see the green one was none and Dominion. At any rate, it's steady. This is what you expect with a cumulative summation of a process that is randomly being distributed up and down, okay? It's going to go to a straight line if everything is normal. If you see a slant to the line, that means that as you are increasing the number of votes in your unit, you are increasing the percentage of that particular candidate.
So if I may, when we're looking at all of these different types of voting machines, which of them look suspicious and which one of them looks normal?
The none and the Dominion. I don't remember what none and Dominion are. They didn't have a vote. Perhaps this was Wisconsin, so I didn't know this. But it basically shows that the ones that are red there all look very suspicious. The purple one is kind of suspicious, but not as much so. But when you see that upward slope, that means you've got something that aligns with your size of the tabulation that's increasing the percent of the Republican vote. I talked about the difference between inadvertent errors, because there are, in fact, inadvertent errors. People make mistakes all the time. You expect those to be randomly distributed across all of the parties. There's basically two, but there's a few others. But if the random errors are distributed, then you would see a straight, flat, level line. When they're not randomly distributed and you see this continuous raise, that means that something's going on there. And that's not, the cause of that cannot be determined from the statistics. The statistics only tell us, oh, there is something going on there. We should look into that more carefully and figure out what's happening.
I think this is a more direct visualization of the pattern we're trying to describe than this. I think you can clearly see where a change happens around 300.
Yeah, I think you're right. And that was, by the way, about where the change happened in my Kansas analysis, it was around 200 or 300 votes. Start to see upward trend for Republicans as the votes get larger.
If we're stuffing a bunch of tabulators at 60% Trump, then you're going to get an asymptote at 60%.
So this is showing as more votes were cast on these machines,
a higher percentage of Republican votes. And basically, if you were concentrating your efforts on those areas with the most votes cast, that's the pattern you would expect to see in your data.
Beth, is there a natural explanation that you can think of?
Not that I can think of, other than they're rigging the vote.
Turn it over to Beth and hear some of her perspectives about our data, but also her experience historically, what she has, what she's seen, what she's gone through. Like, I think that's a really important facet, and her perspective on the latest elections.
It's basically been pretty demoralizing for me, and I like your enthusiasm. I don't want to bring it down, but I can't even get a lawyer to write back to me about representing me in my quest to get actual access to the physical ballots. And I've told them I would accept copies of the physical ballots if I got to see them make the copies, basically. But I've become so suspicious of what computers can do, manipulating the data, manipulating the images, that I feel fairly comfortable with seeing just copies being made. One of the things that Kansas law does allow is that if there's a ballot question that goes to the whole population, only candidates can request a recount. But any citizen can request a recount of a ballot question. So I filed for that. I filed properly. I filed in time. It was denied. Eventually, it went to the Kansas Supreme Court, who, the judge, basically the first judge I saw, yelled at the elections office for not acceding to my request, which was appropriately made, but said I didn't get access to the ballots. And it went all the way to the Kansas Supreme Court, where they said, it's a moot point. The election's over. It's been decided. I'm not trying to change the results of the election. You don't get access. So even though I filed all of the paperwork properly and on time, Secretary of State at the time was Chris Kobach, who lied about that and said that if I'd wanted access, I should have filed properly. Wasn't that nice of him? But
how can we help you get access to that?
I need a lawyer. I have to find a lawyer first, and I don't have a lot of money to pay a lawyer. So if you know of anybody who's, I wrote to, I think it was Democracy Docket, but I haven't gotten anything.
Zero responses. They high and dry. So yes. You need a lawyer, an election lawyer in Kansas, specifically Wichita area?
I need a lawyer in the Wichita area. It doesn't have to be an election lawyer. That's part of the problem, is everybody looks at it and says, this is not my area. But in truth, it isn't anybody's area. Nobody's ever done this before. I'm actually grateful that you found my work valuable, and the fact that you're trying makes me feel good. I'm glad to see someone actually paying attention and working on this issue. So thank you. I appreciate that. And I'll say goodbye now.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Beth.
Thank you.
Beth. You're awesome.